Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Unleashed, where we bring world-class thought leaders live to you every Thursday. I'm your host, of course, Jeff Tetz, the CEO of Results. And if you're joining us for the first time today and you're wondering who we are, our company Results was created to help make it easier for companies to grow. We work alongside business leaders to create high-performing teams and winning cultures. So thank you very much to everyone that's joining us today. This show was really created for you, the leader. As a small token of our appreciation, we will be giving away copies of Tom's latest book, The Excellence Dividend. All you need to do for a chance to win your very own copy is fill out the feedback form at the end of the show. And the way that you access that feedback form is when you click the Leave Meeting button when we're done here today, make sure you click on the Continue button after that in the bottom left-hand side. That button will actually direct you to the feedback page, which also includes some special offers to make an even bigger impact on your business. And if you're a leader that's looking to build your own high-performance remote team during this pandemic, we're running a workshop on June 3rd from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. It's a $300 workshop, but with your attendance today, you can sign up directly for only $79. There's only 20 spots left, and the sign-up form is in the feedback section following the show. And if you like what you see today, the biggest thing that you can do to help us grow our community and our audience is by spreading the message. You can post your comments, your feedback, anything that you learned today, your favorite moment from the episode to social media using the hashtag #ResultsUnleashed. And if you want to get questions in for Tom, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. There's a chat box and a Q&A box, but be sure to put them in the Q&A box. If we don't happen to get to your questions, we will get back to you promptly over email. So if you have questions or comments or anything else that you want to share with us, you can get to us by using the email info@unleashresults.com. And as a special sneak peek to next week's episode, we're going to be joined by peak performance expert Brad Stulberg, all the way from Oakland, California. Now on with today's show. We are so delighted to be joined by a very special guest, one of the most renowned business and leadership thinkers of our time, Tom Peters. Tom has a very storied biography. He is a civil engineering graduate of Cornell, and he earned an MBA and a PhD in business at Stanford. He holds honorary doctorates from institutions that range from the University of San Francisco to the State University of Management in Moscow. And he has been honored by dozens of associations in content areas such as management, leadership, quality, human resources, customer service, innovation, marketing, and design. In the US Navy from 1966 to 1970, he made 2 deployments to Vietnam as a combat engineer in the fabled Navy Seabees. He also worked in the Pentagon and in the White House under the Nixon administration. He then worked at McKinsey & Company from 74 to 81, becoming a partner in 1979. And in 1982, of course, the entire trajectory of Tom's career would forever change when he released his first book and best-selling smash hit, In Search of Excellence. Over the last 40 years, he has authored 17 books, delivered over 2,500 speeches in 50 states to 67 countries and more than 5 million people. He's been called the Red Bull of management thinkers, and in November 2017, he received the Thinkers 50 Lifetime Achievement Award. He's also had a super influence on our business. Tom has a famous quote that execution is the missing 98%. And we used to deliver executive workshops titled The Missing 98 in honor of Tom and his research. And if you're one of his 166,000 Twitter followers, you would think he's just getting started. So I know what you're all thinking. How did you convince Tom to come on your show? Well, here's how we did it. We delivered meals to our staff about 6 weeks ago, and I posted a tweet about it when we were done. It was such a compelling, moving moment for everybody involved, and it's one of my favorite memories of this whole pandemic. And miraculously, Tom saw it and he commented on it. And so as Allison Fergale says, when I see a window of opportunity, I'm a bit of a nibbler. So I took a shot and reached out to Tom and asked if he'd come on the show, expecting I would get denied and turned down, reminiscent of a high school dance. But instead, Tom said thank you, or said thank you for your work, and I'd love to come on the show. And so, Tom, I want to just thank you to start off by your generous commitment of time today. Thank you, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for the welcome, and thank you for your generous willingness to have me on your show. Because the kinds of things that you care about and I care about, which are incredibly similar, can actually be, one hopes, of a little bit of use at this crazy, insane, once every 100 years moment for which none of us, by definition, are prepared.
Yeah, and we certainly hope. So we have a lot of ground that we want to cover today with you, Tom, while we have you. And perhaps where we should start is to acknowledge that you have come out with two very insightful white papers, and thank you for sending those. And one of those white papers is the Excellence 2020, the 27 number ones. And we don't have time to explore all 27 elements, but I would like to dig a little bit deeper into a portion of it. And as maybe as an overarching comment, Tom, regarding managing in a crisis, you have said that between what we do between now and October will largely determine our life legacy. And that's certainly a bold statement. Can you explain maybe what you mean by that?
This is, I think, pretty obviously a once in 100 years event, which is just extraordinary. And though I don't know your demographic, most of the people who are watching and listening to us are probably leaders of something or other, not one of the top 50 companies in Canada or the United States, but running a 6-person training department somewhere, or a 4-person consultancy, or what have you. And I think the way you behave as a human being toward other human beings at this point is really a defining moment. And some people are responding incredibly well, and some people aren't. It's almost as simple as that. I was saying it to somebody relative to smaller businesses. I certainly realize that a small business can have 100% of its revenue wiped out, but let's say 60 or 70%. I think as a business person, it's a strong statement. You got to mortgage your house to take care of your people at this point in time. And you don't have to lose the house and so on. And you're in Canada, I'm in the United States, and social services in Canada. And my wife and I spend a couple of months every winter in New Zealand, are a hell of a lot better than they are in the United States. But when you employ people, you are responsible for them. And you're responsible for their, I don't mean you're a big daddy, and I don't mean you're or anything like that, but you're responsible for their lives in a very significant way. And if you don't buy that act, excuse my language, you are on my permanent shit list. It's about as simple as that. So this is a huge deal. And I was born and raised a Presbyterian, but I don't darken many church doors these days. But I call it lowercase r religious. It's not about an official faith, but it's about, atheists have as much of an obligation to their fellow human beings as, good Catholics who go to Mass 7 times, a week. And that's what this special time is about. And I really think, speaking as an old fart, I said to somebody, as I look at my life as an old fart, I have only one test, and that is, can I walk past a mirror without barfing? And I know we got many things to talk about, but the New York Times columnist David Brooks wrote an op-ed piece, maybe a year or two ago now, and I thought it was one of the most brilliant things I had ever read. He contrasted what he called résumé virtues versus eulogy virtues. And a résumé virtue is I went to the University of Toronto, and I had a 4.7 grade point average, and I was promoted 6 times in the first 5 years. And, I now live in a big house. Those are the resume virtues. The eulogy virtues is, how did you behave toward other people? Did he care? Did she care? Was it demonstrated? And I was an engineer, so I don't have any good classical training, but I think resume virtues versus eulogy virtues is as good as anything that ever came out of the mouth of one of those incredible Greek philosophers.
Yeah, that's well said, Tom. Very well said. Now, you've obviously built a career on the theme of excellence, and prior to you, I always sort of looked at excellence as a destination and striving to get there and something to reach for. Now, one of your 27 most important elements of excellence in 2020 is this notion that excellence is in the next 5 minutes. That stopped me in my tracks and totally reframed how I thought about excellence. How does that show up, excellence in the next 5 minutes?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that you responded as you did, because I do think people think of excellence as a mountain to climb and so on. You and I are having a conversation. The only thing going on in our life right now is the next 5 minutes of this conversation. That's the only thing I can be as a human being, or you can be as a human being. It's one conversation at a time. I had a semi-serious conversation with a psychiatrist friend of mine. If you will give me give me a sample of 10 10-line emails by a boss that I can do a complete, technically accurate psychiatric evaluation of that person from those emails. Do you care? Do you couch your words? Or is it, well, I want to hear this report on this. This is the most trivial story in the world. There was a little issue which is uninteresting, and my wife and I have got a complicated enough life, so we have somebody who helps us with our bill paying and so on, and we switched accountants. And the woman who works with us in the new accountancy, there's a regular exchange of emails, and every email she sends me starts out with, "Hi, Tom, comma, space," and then whatever, like, "Why don't you pay your damn bills on time?" And then it ends up with, have a good day, comma, Barbara. And that is the most trivial thing in the world. And I'm 100 years old, but it struck me as to how untrivial it was. Yeah. Most of us were in a hurry. We do the email. We say, "Joe, let me hear the report on what's going on." That just a little "hi, Tom" is an acknowledgement of humanness. And I don't know how the people who are watching us will respond, but it really hit. You said you were hit by excellence as the next 5 minutes. I was hit equally hard by her first email, and my realization as to what a callous SOB I am. And I don't think I am, but it's just my next to last book was called The Little Big Things. And the hardest part of writing a book is picking an epigraph, as I like to say, because you got to pick 5 sentences that cover the last 5 years of your life. And in The Little Big Things, I think I had my best epigraph in 17 books. It comes from the American statesman Henry Clay, and the one-liner is, "Courtesies of a small and trivial character are the ones which strike deepest in the grateful and appreciating heart." And I think that's, on my top 5 list of that's the stuff you remember. It's when somebody just goes out of the way a little bit to help somebody else. As I said to somebody, forget the $1 million sale. Everybody in the world is going to tell you you're the greatest living human being after you make the $1 million sale. It's, somebody who said, I was talking to your client, and they said, you really pay attention to them. You really take your time. That's the big deal.
Yeah. That's really,
I'll retract my statement. Next 60 seconds.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And like I say, it really reframed for me what excellence is all about, and trying to be more present and just be the best that you can be in that moment. And the interesting thing about it is that it probably gets you to, even if excellence was a destination, it will get you to that destination faster. So,
I completely, I mean, that's obviously my bias. I'm very happy to have you have incredible long-term success. Though I do want to add something, which is just me being a cranky old man. I've obviously had significant success. You have had significant success. My one-liner or two-liner is, I don't like mass murderers. I don't like rapists or child abusers. And then number 3 on my list is successful people who think they deserve their success. If you are in a successful position, you have had so much bloody damn good luck from the beginning, it isn't even funny. I was doing something in London a few years ago, and the client gave me a car to be chauffeured around in, and I was having a conversation with the driver, which is what I like to do. And I don't know what triggered it, but he turned around to me at one point. He said, you know, there are 2 kinds of people who sit in the back of this car. People who remember their roots and people who think they deserve to be there. Yeah. And that was a supercharged holy shit moment. You know, it's so true.
Yeah, I bet.
We're both lucky cats, you know.
Yeah, we are. Well, and Tom, we actually have an interview question that we love asking, and it's, tell us the top 3 reasons you've been successful. The reason that we ask it is to test for humility. And what we're hoping that the candidate's going to say is, well, I have been successful because I've been so lucky to be surrounded by so many amazing people. That's the perfect answer that we're looking for. And we usually get a variance of that answer. So it's a really good point.
I'm sure I irritated a client. I'm a reasonably good public speaker, and I think there's something called the National Speakers Association, and they invited me to give a speech. And in the old days, which won't do the young people watching us any good, there was a guy by the name of David Letterman who had a night show called The Letterman Show, and he always did these top 10 lists about something, and it was number 10, number 9. And so I went through my top 10 list on why I'm such a fabulous speaker. Yeah. And I got to number 1, and I said, now, I really want you to pay attention to my number 1 item, because it is by far the most important. And the number 1 item is choose your parents with great care. You know, it's like the organizer, I think, wanted to shoot me, but I was telling the truth. Yeah. You know, it's, you know, I've said to many people that, you know, I was born in 1942, and of course the Americans, as is true of the Canadians, came out of World War II pretty darned unscathed. Yeah. And I said, I was born in 1942, American, white, male, Protestant, of intelligent parents. And every single one of those variables, and some of them like the Protestant and so on, are not so significant today, but they sure as hell were in those days. And I said, those 5 variables were the first 99% of my success, and the last 1% is the details. And damn it, that is not a throwaway line or a speaker's line. It is true.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well said. And speaking of your top 10 list, I want to come back to your top 27 list. And we are going to make that available, by the way. So we'll have a link in the follow-up notes to your website, and we'll also have a blog post that comes out that includes it. So if you're sort of wondering in the audience, how do I get my hands on those 2 white papers, we'll make it very easy to access those things. Now, the number 1 item on your top 27 is training, training, training. So we're all about people. And I guess the part that I'm continuing to be curious about, and I'm quite disappointed in, Tom, is I don't think that we're getting it en masse. The importance of training and investing in people. We'll take the $1 million and put that into R&D, but we won't put 50 managers through a $20,000 leadership training program. Yep. What's the types of things that we should be training people for? And then where's the disconnect here? Why are we still not getting the message of how vital training and investing in our people really is?
I mean, part of my answer on the disconnect, which is the most unhelpful thing in the world, makes no sense to me. I mean, the one-liner that you probably read in that thing is, I said, if you don't think training is important, ask a police chief, ask a fire chief, ask a nuclear plant operator, ask a general in the Army or an admiral in the Navy. I mean, I said, and I think this is rather true, I said in the military, the person in charge of training is a 3-star general or a 3-star admiral. In the average corporation, it's a ho-hum mid-level job. And so it's, you know, that's the part I don't get. And I, you know, a little bit of it, and again, you and I are speaking across a national border in terms of Canada, and I don't know Canadian accounting rules, but I suspect it's the same. Training is a cost, not a capital investment.
Yeah.
And that annoys the living hell out of me.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I wish we had all day for this.
We can arrange that.
Okay, we can do that. One of my favorite quotes came from a movie director by the name of Robert Altman, and he won a Lifetime Achievement Award and Hollywood Oscar. And his one-liner in his speech was, "The role of the director is to create a space where actresses and actors can become more than they have ever been before, more than they have ever dreamed of being."
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's the view we should take of every person who works for us or with us, which is the right term. And maybe it goes back to our little, you know, exchange on eulogy virtues and resume virtues. And again, given all the technology change and the things that are going on right now, if somebody works for you, in my opinion, on a part-time project for 90 days, and at the end of those 90 days as a not payroll part-time person, they are not better prepared for the future than they were when they walked in the door. You screwed up as a leader. But with all this stuff, damn it, and the research is there. Funny little thing about training people. It is one hell of a good way to make happy customers and get rich. This is, you know, we ain't talking altruism. I mean, I think it is altruism, the degree to which you care about people and so on, but it pays. You know, the numbers, there's a big research piece that was done in the US, and they did the short-termers who do this maximizing shareholder value crap, which has been the most dangerous thing that's happened in the American economy and in the history of the world, and the people who invest for the long term. And the long-term financial and growth outcomes were embarrassingly great. Jobs created, money made, et cetera, et cetera. And all these things I'm talking about, I just don't get it. It's like, pay attention to people and get rich. What's your problem with that?
Yeah.
And no, it doesn't happen immediately tomorrow morning. I do want to add, which wasn't in your question, but it's in my answer anyway. And this is training, but also the hiring and promoting part. Hire for 100% of jobs primarily based on empathy, and promote for 100% of promotions primarily based on empathy. You know, there's a guy, I quoted him in the Excellence Dividend book, and he runs a mid-size, excuse my other telephone ringing in the background. Hey, that's what it's all about.
That's right.
At any rate, he runs a mid-size biotech company, and he said in simple, plain English, we only hire nice people. And he said, listen, biotech, the people who are doing our research have these insanely complex degrees, and I can't even pronounce the name of the degree, but let's call it some biochemistry this. He said, here's the funny thing. There are actually a lot of people who have those degrees. Don't hire the jerks.
Yeah.
And whether it's and in his case, which I love, is you're the CEO and I'm the supplicant, and I blow you away with my scientific background, and you just are shaking because you can't wait to sign me up. Well, once I leave you, and this is his term, I have to run the gauntlet. And running the gauntlet is a dozen interviews with the receptionist, the person who cleans the place, with a fellow scientist, with somebody in the finance department. And any of those, I'm the most incredibly, I have an IQ of 700 and I graduated ahead of #1 in my class at MIT. Any one of those dozen people can ding me and say, nope, ain't gonna employ Peters. And I love that. It's, you know, hire people who give a damn about people. And it is true that, you know, there are a lot of PhDs out there. hire the ones you know, like to have a beer with at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an excerpt in Howard Schultz's Starbucks book, Onward, and he's asked often about all around the world, how do you have baristas that are so happy and enjoy people? And he says, well, that's really easy. We just hire people that smile. So that's always stuck out with me. For me, now, what are you looking for with empathy, though, Tom? Like, do you have some ways that you are scanning for that early on to try to get an accurate indication?
Well, glad you asked. And it's in one of those two papers. There's a community health organization. It's out of the University of Pennsylvania. And in their arena, average turnover is 50 to 75% a year, and in the industry, as it was for them. And, you know, our viewers, listeners have to listen very carefully to my language here. They changed their hiring practices, and the turnover went from over 50% to 1.7%. And on top of that, from an outcome standpoint, the people who they serve were 40% less likely to have a hospitalization than before. And one of the things they did is for candidates, they had a social. It was just a little, you know, I'm sure there wasn't beer. It was probably Cokes and iced tea, but they had a little social gathering. And you're one of the people who works there and is a judge. And it's, you know, does Tom talk all the time or does he occasionally listen? And it was a series of social things like this, which are not easy to judge. But they said the shock of the whole thing after the fact was they discovered that where your degree came from was, you know, in a deep second or third place, and how you had done socially. He said, people, you and I sure as hell wasn't born yesterday, and you weren't quite born yesterday. You know, you know people who care about people. I mean, it's funny. My wife and I always have this exchange because I'm one of those horrible people who talks to everybody. And she said, you know, why do you do that? I said, well, let me put it this way. If you're in Washington, D.C., the cab driver is likely to be an Ethiopian. And I said, Susan, he is so much more interesting than you and I are. The poor guy has probably gone through a famine. He's gone through civil war. He probably had a second cousin who was beheaded 4 blocks away. And our life, you know, by comparison, is just so trivial. And it's, everybody is interesting. I mean, this is silly. And this is my problem. This is before COVID, when you went to grocery stores and talked to people. I was in the aisle at the grocery store, and I was getting toilet paper, and there was a woman next to me who I don't know who the hell she was or where she was from. We ended up having a 10-minute conversation about soft toilet paper versus non-soft toilet paper. And she said, well, you know, the non-soft stuff flushes better. And I said, well, yeah, but the other one, but people are interesting and people have something to say. And relative to hiring people, look for the people who would love to have a conversation about toilet paper roughness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Listen, I do want to, and the authors did, and this is non-trivial. They did put an asterisk. They said, we've done this, it has worked, but you have to be careful about cultural differences. You know, you may get a different kind of response from somebody who grew up in a certain kind of environment, and it's really important to take that into account, and it's not easy. And
Yeah.
they think they've done it to a significantly effective degree.
Yeah, well, and Tom, that's very timely. We do have a question from the audience that is exactly about that topic, addressing managing teams that have diverse set of geographic location, belief systems, cultural nuances. Do you have any sort of suggestions or tips for how do you manage cultural diversity, geographic diversity?
Nothing that's of any value.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It was a timely question.
No, but what I mean by that is my throwaway line.
Mm-hmm.
Don't hire anybody as an external contractor or as an employee. Well, number one determinant of everything in an organization is the quality of first line supervisors.
Yeah.
Never, ever. I mean, there's the old one-liner, which is true. The sergeants run the Army, the chief petty officers run the Navy. And that is 100% true. Never, ever, 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 ever promote anybody to a first line leadership position who has not demonstrated the ability to get along with and appreciate and understand people of very different backgrounds. And an awful lot of that too, and this will get into something I think you and I said we were going to talk about, an awful lot of that is the propensity to listen versus the propensity to talk. Mm-hmm. And I think you can train it a little bit and make people more sensitive, but hire the listeners.
Yeah.
And, I think that's really critical. And that does, to make a segue that I think you said you were interested in, there are gender differences.
Yeah.
And there are women who are crappy listeners and there are men who are great listeners. But statistically, I mean, to use the statistician's term, the central tendency, on average, women are better listeners than men are. And I think that's, it's kind of funny because I'm not trained in any of this stuff, but when I got interested in the women's issues, I was reading a fair amount of science. And there's a psychiatrist in the University of California, San Francisco, psychiatrically trained, who wrote a wonderful book called The Female Brain. And the one trivial thing I remember about it is she said at age 3 days, girl babies are making 4 times more eye contact with their fellow human being than boys. They are more sociable creatures, which, if you believe in Darwin, is a no-brainer. Yeah. I mean, you and I were Darwinianly selected to run through jungles and throw spears at things. And if you were a really good spear thrower, that was a win. That was a win. The women were back in the camp, taking care of not just kids, but taking care of the camp and protecting the camp and so on. But there really are gender differences, even though it's never 100%. And I think all the research says women are better leaders, women are better negotiators, women are better salespeople. The one I loved is women are better investors.
Yeah, we have a slide coming up right now, Tom, and it is a good segue. You made a very interesting comment this week about female leaders, and it certainly stirred the pot on social media. And I am interested about this because it's a really important topic. Gender balance and equality, all of those themes are very, very important. Like, how do we actually start to meaningfully move in a direction of gender balance? Like, where are some of the incremental steps, do you think?
I guess. And I haven't got it. All the questions you've asked are impossible questions to answer. No, I mean, they aren't. I hate one-liners when you're talking about something that's deep and human, psychological. I'll tell you my story, and maybe this will help. There was a woman who was the president of my training company, and I think I'm a reasonably good feminist. I went to the pro-choice march on Washington and so on and so forth. And she came, we were chatting somewhere, and she said, I've got a meeting that you're going to attend in a couple of weeks in Boston. And I was in San Francisco. I said, uh-huh. And she said, I've gathered a group of women, and their purpose in life, she said, you're a good boy, but their purpose in life is to educate you. And it was an incredible group. The first woman to drive an Indy 500 car, the woman who headed Disney University, a woman who who created a very successful chain of home furnishings company. And I thought, and I think I was a pretty good guy, but I mean, the day was just, I hate the word epiphany because it sounds like total bullshit to me. But it was an epiphany. And what these women were telling me is they would go to a car dealership, and she's going to a car dealership. She happens to bring her husband along, and the car salesman never talks to her. And another woman I loved, it was at a different event, and this woman was a state senator for the great state of California. And I had talked about this in the speech. She said, let me give you another one for your evidence box. She said, I had a bad back. I took my husband with me to see the orthopedist to talk about the problem. We sat down, and she said, at the end of 5 minutes, he had not asked me any questions whatsoever. And she said, I finally turned to him, and I looked him in the eye, and I said, it's my back that hurts. And I really began to learn about these issues of disengagement. I was talking about this same stuff in the UK a few months later. And a woman came up to me afterwards, and she was the founder and CEO of a middle-sized investment company. And she said, and the Brits, for tax reasons a while back, and this was a while back, everybody got a company car, and it had to do with, I don't know, the income tax stuff, but it was important. And so she goes to a car dealership, and she's, looking for a car that's going to be her company car. Yeah. And the salesman, I was thrilled by this to know the Brits are as big a bunch of assholes as we are, excuse my language. But she said, the salesman turns to her at one point and said, it is so great that you're working for a company that gives their secretaries cars. She's the CEO and founder. And I thought that was ha, 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 ha. And then I heard the story in a million different ways. But part of the answer to your question is I got a couple of business degrees. I like looking at P&Ls. I went after this issue from the outside in. And what I mean by that is I said, here's one reason that you might think of paying attention to women more than you do. They buy everything. They buy 80 or 85% of consumer goods. They make, which is less important in Canada, given, again, the national financing, they make 95% of healthcare decisions. They make 90% of home financing decisions. And the other thing, and again, I mean, I know we're talking to a global audience, but I'm thinking of you as the two countries of that are represented here in that sense of the word. You have the very senior management issues, but in the US, over 50% of commercial purchasing officers are women. So not only are they picking the family vacation, but well over half the time, they are the ones who put out the RFP for a 5-year, $2 billion ISIT program or an ERP program or what have you. So I said, listen, one good reason to pay attention to women is they buy everything. I mean, I have my one-liner for two markets, because the other one that nobody pays attention to is old people. Yeah, and I said, here's the deal. Women buy everything and old people have all the money. And if that's not a marketing inducement, I don't know what the hell would be. And then I, peel it back to the fact that if this is the case, wouldn't it be interesting to have 50% of your executive team be women? Yeah. And I think it's criminal if you don't. I mean, they're better managers and so on. And that's important, hugely important, as we just talked about. They buy everything, you dork. And, you know, with the exception of Giorgio Armani, the reality is men do a crappy job of designing things for women. I had a woman architect in a seminar years ago, and we got to talking about this, and she said, well, I was taking a woman house hunting, and she said, and she was just laughing hysterically. She said, I took her to 6 houses, and only one of them had the washing machines upstairs on the 2nd floor. And she said, all the beds are on the 2nd floor. What could be more logical than that? And she looked at me and she said, you do realize that 1 in 1,000 architects who are men would never vaguely have occurred to them that this was a good idea. And that's a funny ha-ha, but the numbers involved are, you know, just too big not to pay attention to.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great, Tom. And I was gonna touch on the 2 demographics that you mentioned in your white paper, and you've done a really eloquent job of doing that. So there's a couple of other areas I want to explore on your top 27 list. Now and one of them is is kind of related to what we've been talking about, but you've used the phrase quite often that a bias for action, and I've seen you use that in various places online through the years. Can you elaborate what a bias for action means and why that is so critical?
The shorthand form, and this goes all the way back to In Search of Excellence in 1982, where we had 8 attributes of excellent companies, and the number 1 was called a bias for action.
Yeah.
In big companies in particular, there's too much talk, and there's too much planning, and there's not enough doing. Ross Perot started a company called EDS, Electronic Data Systems, that was one of the really first big ISIT houses. And he sold it for a ton of money, I think it was in the mid-'80s, to General Motors. And Perot's Perotism that I've always loved is he said, let me explain the difference between GM and EDS. He said, at EDS, our motto is ready, fire, aim. He said, at GM, the motto is ready, aim, 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 aim. And it's a throwaway line, but it's critically important. Herb Kelleher, who ran Southwest, the late Herb Kelleher, sad to say, because he was a good friend, who ran Southwest Airlines so brilliantly. His one-liner is, he said, we have a strategy at Southwest. It's called doing things, trying stuff. And the problem, which is true of every darn thing we've talked about today, is I can say it, you can say it, but these are relative to an organization of 6, let alone 666, deep cultural issues. You know, they are not about issuing an edict. They are about a leader like you or me when I had a bigger company who lives this stuff every day, who you know, is focused on what are you trying next, as opposed to, you know, creating another 500-page or even 50-page strategic plan. Yeah. You know, I will admit to a bias. To be sure, I'm only 77, but I've never had a plan for anything. And I'm stealing from, and I wish to hell, I mean, you're in not the part of Canada that speaks French the way the Easterners do. But I wish I could get my French right. There's a wonderful Napoleonic line which basically says, you know, don't talk, jump into the middle of the fray and figure out what the hell happens. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's the key. Just get on with it. It's the key, but it is not simple.
Yeah.
You know, anytime I see one of those 3,897 books on the business shelf that it says the 7 ways to do blank, they are probably good ideas, but there are no simple 7 rules for, I mean, I've been asked a lot for the work about the, you know, work from home stuff. Well, you know, how do you deal with that socially? And there have been people with good ideas, but, and the 2 things are tied to your question. I said, look, read everything you can, get as many good ideas as you can. But let me tell you the real secret. You are you, you're not me, you're not somebody else. There's only one answer: experiment.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have 23 Zoom meetings this way. Try it this way, try it that way, look in the mirror, think about your facial expression, whatever. Read the articles, get as smart as you can, but at the end of the day, it's about trying stuff out. Do we go around the quote unquote room, virtual room, or do we do this or do we do that? And there are a million rituals that you could try, but the only way you'll figure it out is if you try them. And the other thing on top of that is when you are trying them, for God's sakes, tell the 9 people who are working for you that's what you're doing. I mean, I want that boss in the first virtual meeting to say, let me give you a secret. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, but we want to get some work done, and we're going to be living with each other in a very different way than we were when we were in the office. And over the next 2 weeks, as we adjust, we're all going to do stupid things. And I hate that. The boss has got to feel good enough about herself or himself to be able to go into one of those meetings, virtual or real, and say, you know, and I will not go this far with the language, but I don't really know what the F I'm doing. But you and I have got to figure this out together, so let's play with it. And, you know, so many bosses are insecure that they think if they say something like that, they're going to give away the store. It's like a funny thing with the equivalent of this conversation. Now, a lot of the newscasters, you know, I'm sure the CBC is doing it as much as the U.S. networks. The newscaster is in his or her home. And I saw this little example. You've got a 5-year-old kid, and you're a famous Canadian newscaster, and you're talking about serious things like war and peace and economic disasters. And your 5-year-old comes through the door and half climbs up on your lap. There are 2 responses. Response number 1, which I watched, is to effectively push the kid away. And now I'm talking to 4 million Canadians or 11 million Americans. The best response, even though we're talking about war and peace, is to pick the 5-year-old up and say, well, you know, maybe I'm going to ask Georgie about this, but if you behave, I mean, this is excuse my language, a sucker play. If you behave like a human being and act like you are an at-home parent with a 5-year-old right in the middle of this conversation, you just won the hearts and minds of 98% of the people who are participating. And I wanted to weep for this jackass. I mean, he didn't do anything vicious or physical, but it was, you know, one of these. I wanted to weep for him, and I wanted to, you know, have a call in like this and say, do you know that you have a sub-freezing IQ? It's dumb. I mean, not only is it inhuman, and I don't like you because of it, but it's dumb. I can win my whole audience over. You know, I mean, one of the things I do in giving a speech is I always hit the streets for a little bit, and I want to, you know, just get a physiological feel of people in Calgary or people in LA or people in Oakland or what have you, and just have a feel. And I shoot the shit, and I read the local newspapers. I remember, and this is a horrible thing on all dimensions, I lived in the little tiny state of Vermont for many years. And there was a story, I think I was in Minneapolis, and it was about somebody who misbehaved as a driver, and they had 15 drunk with driving convictions. And I went in, and nobody even killed, or it would have been obviously not funny. I went in and I said, God, I'm feeling at home. I said, you guys had somebody who caused an accident who had 15 DWIs, drunk while intoxicated. I said, I thought that only happened in Vermont. Well, I mean, you do it with the right facial expression and so on. I had the hearts and minds of 1,000 people within 90 seconds. And that sounds like an arrogant statement, and it is an arrogant statement, but it is true.
Yeah.
It's just, again, one thing I remember, I was talking to a big group of a couple of thousand people, and they had the right cameraman. They had sports cameramen who had a shoulder launch camera.
Yep.
And somebody had told me about a guy in the 20th row who was kind of a billionaire and had really done this thing. So I start the speech. I leave the stage. I go up to the 20th row. I ask the person sitting next to this guy to move, and I can, proceed with that. Again, if you hadn't had a sports camera so that it couldn't have been on my face, it wouldn't have worked. But he and I had a conversation for 5 minutes about this stuff. And, and I'm not talking about, again, for the best of reasons, you win the hearts and minds of the people who you want to convince. And the research again on this, which is different but the same with the work from home stuff, is, and this is hard-nosed research, body language is 5 times more important than the words you use. Period. All stop. With the wrong expression, you can wipe out the most brilliant statement ever made by humankind. And it's really excuse me, this is a cough I've had for 6 months. I am not.
You're not contagious.
Germs through the through the plexiglass. I had to throw the other one in when I made that comment about body language. The other thing, and I'm always angry about this, and I'm pissed off at anybody who's watching us who doesn't get it. There is enough research to sink a ship that says positive remarks are 30 times more powerful than negative remarks. Keep your negative feedback to yourself. There was a great American professional football coach once who said, I don't worry about weaknesses. I like to build on strengths. And, that's great at CFL or NFL sports. And it's also great in a 7-person project team working on an ISIT project. Build on strengths. And then, I don't know. We haven't got
all. So Tom, I have to ask you, and I'm getting inundated with messages about this, and I might get my wrist slapped for even asking this, but we're getting close to being up on the hour, and we could do 2 things here. We could finish on the hour like we planned, or if you love the conversation, you feel up to it, we could keep going. But I'm totally respectful of your time and all of that. So tell me what your thoughts are on ending.
Let's do both. Let's have our formal conversation. And then I think you have questions, right?
There's tons of questions.
Let's take 5 or 6 minutes kind of after the formal stuff, and let's just take questions.
Sure.
I'm tired of listening to you, and you're probably tired of listening to me. So why don't we have a conversation with the real people?
Sounds good. So I'll get to some of these questions here. Now, you mentioned earlier the difference between eulogy virtues and resume virtues. And I know that you don't like to talk about yourself, but you have accomplished a lot in your career, and you still have lots to accomplish. I know that. But what do you want your legacy to be?
I grew up in not in the tough city of Baltimore, Maryland. And I dedicated my 3rd book to a guy by the name of William Donald Schaefer, who had been the mayor of Baltimore. And Baltimore's now got a ton of problems again, but he really turned the city around. And when he retired as mayor, I was a speaker at his retirement party. And after we all said all the wonderful things, he gets up and he said, let me tell all of you here, in case there's practical implication, let me tell you what I want on my tombstone. He said, I want 2 words. He cared. He cared. And that's, I've got 4 quant degrees. And I said to somebody, nothing I've said for the last 40 years requires more than the certificate of graduation from the 3rd grade at the age of 8. We're saying put people first, try a bunch of stuff. And I care about this stuff. And I do think I pretty much transmit that by that body language and so on. And, I'd be happy, like that he cared, to say he tried his damnedest. I will say, which I think is related, and it's important to me at least, if the motivational speaker Tony Robbins comes into a meeting of 1,000 people, he expects to change 1,000 lives. If I come into a meeting of 1,000 people and 3 people leave the meeting and say, I'm going to really do things differently, I have had one hell of a good day. So, you hope you get through to somebody here or somebody there, and that and the funny thing about it is, which I figured out, is I never change anybody's mind. What I do is people who already buy this stuff, I give them a real swift boot in the ass. And I don't know whether you're a football fan or not.
Huge.
But
Patriots fan, huge.
I said, I'm of no use to somebody who's on their own 20-yard line. But what I hope to do is help people who are on their opponent's 5-yard line and give them a real swift kick in the butt and push them into the end zone. And I've had so many people come up to me after speech, which is so gratifying, and say, I always thought I was a weirdo until today. And people look at me funny for doing the things that I do. But what you've said to me today is, hey, that's okay. It's all right to be a business person and be nice. That's not, not the end of the world. And so, it's and same thing is true for you. You hit, if we've got X number of people listening to us and watching us on a regular basis, you'll catch somebody here and there. Mm-hmm. I mean, my one of my happiest days came recently, and this was out of a tweet stream. Somebody said they'd read In Search of Excellence, and our book did sell well, so that's not unusual. But this guy said, I used it in teaching Sunday school. I started crying when I read that, but the point is, it isn't religious, capital R or lowercase r, but it's about taking care of people.
Yeah. And
so, I don't know how the hell you'd use it in Sunday school, but yeah, I got it. It's just, the weirdest thing with and again, I won't resort to the language which I used, but I did, when the new book came out a year or so ago, did 20 or 25 podcasts, because that's the way you do PR now. I swear to God, 23 of the people started the conversation by saying, now you talk a lot about people. And I look at them and I say, and remember, I was in the Navy, so I know how to use long strings of foul language, should I be so inclined. I look at them, and depending on whether it's a family audience or not, my response is, what the F else am I supposed to talk about? My definition of an organization is very simple, 6 words. Yeah. People, serving people, serving people. Leaders, serving employees, serving customers. And it's all about people, and it's all about service. And that's the all-important, getting back to your starting point about 98, that's the all-important first 98%, or maybe even a little bit higher than 98%. Incidentally, thinking of your 98% when on the execution, I found it 10 years ago. My favorite execution quote comes from a U.S. Army general by the name of Omar Bradley. And he was the commander of all American troops. The Canadians were led by Montgomery, poor you. That's a different story.
Yeah.
He was the commander of all the U.S. troops at D-Day. And his one-liner that I loved was, amateurs talk about strategy, professionals talk about logistics. You can have a strategy for occupying France and pushing the Germans out, but if the bullets don't show up at the guns at the right point, it is just another piece of paper. And I have to say one more thing. And it's funny, I've said it 100 times and I'm really getting tears in my eyes. Montgomery did command the Brits and I think the Canadians. And they said the day before D-Day, Montgomery gave one of the greatest charge 'em up speeches that had ever been given. And not Bradley, but the guy who ran the whole coalition was General Eisenhower, Dwight David Eisenhower. Thinking about where you're speaking to me from, he was a Midwesterner. Yeah. And I think that explains most of it. Montgomery gave a great speech, and Eisenhower went out to the beach and walked among the soldiers and put his arm around them and wished them his best. And somebody wrote about it, and they took this out of a diary. And you try to read this sentence without tearing up. He said, they were talking about Eisenhower, and they said Eisenhower's demeanor was such that parents were willing to send their boys to die for him. I mean, Jesus Christ. What an incredible, and the other thing is we see these generals today, and I don't know about the Canadian generals, but the Americans now look like those old Soviet generals with 80 rows of ribbons. We got something, everybody who went on active duty in the military got a simple little medal. It was called National Defense Medal, and it just says, you were there. Eisenhower had, obviously, particularly from various countries, had enough medals to, fill a pickup truck. He was buried in a very simple and plain uniform with his National Defense Medal on, period. And that's who he was. And I did make the joke, but I really do think Midwesterners are a little nicer than the rest of us. Yeah. The one-liner, which I'm sure you heard about Chicago. Chicago is New York without the attitude. And there's a little bit of truth to that. There is a level of decency that maybe the Easterners and the Westerners don't have. So, congratulations on choosing the right birthplace.
Well, Tom, thanks for sharing that story. That's very profound, very heartfelt. I can't help but notice, okay, so 17 books, 40 years in this business. It's hard enough to write one book. Our founder is in process. Tim O'Connor's writing a book right now, and it's hard enough to write one. So to write 17 books, to speak in front of 5 million plus people, to keep going, as active as you are on Twitter, sharing your opinions and trying to make an impact, like what drives you at this stage of your career? What motivates you right now?
Same as in the past. You have to give a shit.
Yeah.
It's as I said jokingly, which isn't a joke, if you graduated from the 3rd grade at age 8, you can handle all the intellectual sophistication of my arguments, which is 0. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where it came from. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously I like doing what I'm doing. I'm shocked. I'm as shocked as you are by the books. I was trained as an engineer, for God's sakes. Yeah. Engineers, I was a pretty good writer in high school, but as evidence suggests, they drive that out of you in engineering school. Yeah. I've had good editors. That certainly doesn't hurt, but it's stuff I care about, and it is stuff that works. Mm-hmm. And again, as I said, my good luck is I'm not trying to change 1,000 minds. I'm trying to change 2. Mm-hmm. You do what you can, and the only part that I'm loath to say, this isn't the books, but I was trained. I mean, my PhD at Stanford was in organizational effectiveness, and the guy who trained me got his PhD in psychological statistics at the age of 20 from the University of Chicago, for great God's sakes. And I was trained as a rat psychologist, as I call it, B.F. Skinner positive reinforcement. And I said to somebody, I really would love to think that I give these speeches because I really care. But I said, I'm also scared that maybe I've just become addicted to the applause. And you never, it's probably a little bit of both. You never know. I mean, my speech thing is, which I really do mean, I've given 2,500 speeches and I haven't gotten one right yet, but maybe tomorrow.
Yeah.
I remember Tom Hanks said when somebody had an interview, he said, well, I said, I've done a bunch of movies and I haven't performed above the level of C+ yet. And, so you keep going after.
Well, being addicted to the dopamine hit of changing people's lives, I could think of worse things to be addicted to, Tom. Let's take some more questions from the audience now. So I've got one from Andrea that's been sitting up there for a bit, and it's interesting. What was your biggest leadership failure where you had the most learning?
Well, boy, I have a real problem with you because you're very good at what you do. And so it almost makes me want to tell the truth. I've been encouraged by a lot of people to write a memoir. And I'm reluctant because I think you should tell the truth. And in a memoir, it's useless. The biggest failure twice is paying too much attention to work and not enough attention to my spouse and family or what have you. You get caught up in it, and as you can tell, I really love it. And I'm not happy about those personal failures, and I wouldn't want to have to write about them, particularly in great detail. Business failures. I mean, I'm a phony. I write about business, but I've never had anything more than a 25 or 30 person company. So I can't talk about it the same way a CEO of a $7 billion Canadian or American or French company would. But it is the Résumé virtues and the Eulogy virtues, and they're, I won't say what can I say because that's dismissive. Some real lapses that I'm not happy about, which is why you'll never read a memoir. Hey, you can't, it's bullshit to give somebody a memoir and not talk about that kind of stuff. And I can't write about it, and I would not be right for other people. And that's another discussion that you and I will have over a beer.
Yeah. Well,
I'm also sure you will not be over Bud.
That's good.
Are there any craft beers in Canada as there are now in the U.S.?
The craft beer market in our part of the country is massive, and it's just getting started. So
hilarious. Yeah, I said to somebody, it used to be, and of course I'm a lot older than most of the people who are, all the people who are watching us. It used to be that you gave a $2 tip to somebody who helped you. And then it got up to $5. And I said to a friend who gave somebody $5, I said, give them 10. A single beer costs $10 now. It's not, not what it used to be. But yeah, the craft beer thing is, and it's really dry. What I do love is it's really hitting some of the big guys right in the chops.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't understand. I don't understand cucumber beer, I will have to say, or whatever the hell is in somebody.
Nor do I. And it's funny, Tom. One of the partners in our business, Jeff White, is a former naval commander in the Canadian Armed Forces, and then he's also a craft beer owner. He owns the Canmore Brewing Company. So some cool parallels there.
Yeah, absolutely,
Tom. And then
I will say to various people in various places, there is no question whatsoever that the 4 most important years in my life, which is the opposite of that answer, were the 4 years I spent in the Navy.
Yeah.
No issue.
Yeah.
And to have done it from age 24 to age 28, 2 in Vietnam, 2 in the Pentagon, that was a life changer. I mean, I did get, which is the same thing that's true for all of us. My 2 years in Vietnam were 2 different deployments, 18 months on the ground, not 2 years. You don't exaggerate about numbers like that, 2 9-month deployments. And I had 2 commanding officers, and I've written about them, and I call them Captain Day and Captain Night. Yeah. And the first one was the most incredible positive role model for leadership known to humankind, and the second one was the worst. And you can't ask for anything more than that. Yeah. So whenever you're looking at a leadership issue, you say, what would Captain Day have done, and what would Captain Night have done? And you do the one, and you avoid the other like the plague.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Tom, I have to acknowledge the level of transparency and vulnerability that you're showing with us today. And you talk about empathy so much, and empathy and vulnerability and authenticity and courage. Those are all very interrelated. And I'm not sure if you can be good at one with not being good at the rest. And judging by the comments that started showing up in the chat when you were sharing some of your deep personal stories, if you ever did release your memoirs, people would love you more, not less.
So that's very kind. Why don't we end it on that? That's a good ending point.
Absolutely.
And I do have a couple things I have to do.
Sounds good, Tom. Thank you.
Even though it's stay-at-home day. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much for your time today. So many people admire and care and love you because you've made such an impact, a selfless impact in all of our lives. And you continue to do that every single day. I don't think there's a day that goes by where I don't learn something from you, or I'm not amused or caught off guard by a paradigm shift that you've caused inside of me by your perspective on things. So just thank you for devoting your life to serving others, and you just taking time to spend an hour and a half with us today. I don't think we ever thought that this would be something that would come out of the pandemic, and it's one of the beautiful things that we're experiencing is just the ability to connect with people that you wouldn't have before. So Tom, thank you so much.
Well, I'm gonna try to get the last word in anyway. And I want to say to you, and this is not an exaggeration, the interviewee is as good as the interviewer, period. So thank you for a wonderful morning.
Thank you, Tom. I don't know how to properly thank you for that other than just to say thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks to everybody for joining us. And you can stay connected with us on a go-forward basis as well. If we didn't get to your questions or you have other comments or stories to share, just accolades or feedback for Tom, we'll make sure we get it to him. And you can send that to us at info@unleashresults.com. Please fill out the feedback survey when you leave here today by clicking the continue button after you click the leave button. We are running a workshop on June 3rd on culture and connection in the time of pandemic. So how do you build a team that performs at its highest level in this current environment? You can certainly contact us on Twitter as well. And Tom's newsletter is available at tompeters.com/contact/subscribe. It's a fantastic newsletter. We'll make sure that his 2 white papers are available. And next week's episode, right out of Oakland, California, we're joined by Brad Stulberg, and he is a peak performance expert. Been following him for 2 years. He is filled with simple, practical advice to live your best life and show up at your very best version of yourself every single day. No hacks, no BS, just the essentials of being at your best more often. That's next Thursday, June 4th from 10 to 11 Mountain. Tom Peters, we're beside ourselves. Thank you so much for this amazing hour and a half with you. And look forward to staying in touch with you, of course. Be well, everybody. And hoping business is treating you well. And as this pandemic progresses, that your family's healthy, you're healthy, and ultimately that your organizations are, if they're not thriving right now, they're on their way to recovery and rebuild. And we're certainly here to help with that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.